It watches from across the table while a man eats, and something about its stillness makes his hands shake. He calls it feeding the world. He does not sound comforted. Personnel assigned to this duty rarely last. What became of the previous handler, referred to only as Jerry, is documented later in this file. The interviewee's voice cuts across the recording before the interviewer can finish a question, refusing the premise of volunteerism outright. That's not what it takes, Harrell says. A silence follows on the transcript, unremarked by either party. Mooney begins again. Did you volunteer? Harrell does not let the question complete itself. No one volunteers. No one. I was put into this position nearly instantly after Jerry turned himself into an ornament. Didn't even get the chance. Mooney interrupts here, the correction procedural rather than sympathetic. We're not supposed to talk about that. Harrell acknowledges the constraint. I know. I lasted this long without talking to anyone about all of this. Mooney's next line reads as scripted, delivered as though from a manual. I'm supposed to tell you that's a good thing. Harrell answers with a question. Is it? Mooney offers what appears to be the sanctioned response. Not everyone makes it this far. The transcript notes that Harrell snorts. What follows is the operative exchange for the purposes of this file. Harrell says, "We're feeding the world, right?" Mooney replies in the same measured register as before. There are ways to have a better perspective on your circumstances. Feeding the world is a good outlook. Harrell's rejoinder is recorded verbatim and preserved without redaction. Yeah, one twitching fucking thing at a time. Mooney's follow-up is a single prompt, offered without inflection in the surviving audio. Why say that? The recording continues. Entry continues. The next documented affliction concerns a subject whose vocal cords fused with gastrointestinal tissue. Per the record, the subject moaned continuously through the stomach for 18 hours prior to slaughter. No further commentary accompanies the entry. The log advances without pause. Subject 9599 1.016. Porcine. Affliction listed as follows. The blood of the subject became gelatinous. Respiration became near untenable, likely due to oxygen being unable to circulate through the altered medium. The subject remained alive for 7 hours until slaughter. The interval is noted without elaboration. Subject 9599 1.019. Bovine. Affliction. The subject developed cyclopia over a period of 59 hours. Upon completion of the change, fusing of the skull left the subject with brain damage. Slaughtered after 12 days. The document offers no assessment of the interval between onset and disposition, only the numbers. Subject 9599 1.022. Avian. Affliction. Limbs lost all organic mass below the knee. The subject remained immobile for 19 days before slaughter. The clinical phrasing does not extend to describe what remained standing in place of the limbs or how the subject was maintained during that interval. The entry simply closes. Subject 9599 1.023. Avian. The record proceeds to the next designation without transition, as though the cataloger had settled into a rhythm. Each entry occupies the same structure: a number, a species, an affliction, a duration, a slaughter. The recording, we are told, continues past this point, though the ledger itself does not vary in tone across the sequence that follows. The ledger resumes. The subject in question, an avian specimen, developed adult-sized equine teeth within its beak. The growth of these teeth broke the beak and fractured the skull. The subject was slaughtered after 18 hours. The next entry concerns a bovine specimen. Its internal musculature is recorded as having arranged itself into dense knots, described in the affliction column as resembling clenched fists. These knots contracted in sequence, one after another, at intervals of 45 minutes. The subject was slaughtered after 14 days. The following entry concerns a porcine specimen. Over a period of 5 days, the subject's skin grew rigid and calcified. By the point of slaughter, the dermis had become a thick, continuous shell. The ledger notes, without further elaboration, that the subject remained fully conscious throughout this process and responded to stimuli by way of eye movement. The entry after this concerns an avian specimen. Its legs merged into a singular trunk-like appendage. The subject moved, according to the record, via undulating muscle contractions. It was slaughtered after 5 days. The next entry concerns a bovine specimen. At this point, the pattern first suggested in the opening of this file resolves into something plainer than expected. There is no escalation of language. There is no annotation of concern. The document does not, in its own voice, register any of these outcomes as remarkable. The affliction column simply continues, one row after another, and the interval between onset and slaughter is recorded with the same evenness throughout. One entry notes an affliction in which internal organs ceased biological function but remained metabolically active. The subject displayed no vital signs, yet continued responding to stimuli for 26 days. Slaughter was carried out on day 27. The record moves on without commentary. Subject SCP-9599-1036, porcine, is documented next. In this instance, the entire circulatory system shifted outside the body, floating approximately 15 centimeters above the subject. The animal remained alive and ambulatory throughout. Slaughter was performed after 16 days. Subject SCP-9599-1037, bovine, follows. The affliction is described in a single word. The subject was inverted. Slaughter was immediate. The file then transitions to Addendum 9599.2, an interview. A note precedes the transcript, explaining that due to the nature of being stationed at SCP-9599, staff were provided access to limited psychological health care. What follows is recorded as an interview between the plant manager, Gerard Harrell, and Dr. Marley Mooney. The transcript opens with the standard log marker. Dr. Mooney speaks first. How much longer? 7 months. You've been here longer than most. That takes strength. The exchange is short and the recorded language plain. The clinician's opening question is undirected, its subject unspecified in the transcript itself. The plant manager answers with a duration. The clinician's reply acknowledges the length of his posting, relative to others assigned to the site, and characterizes his continued presence there as an act requiring strength. The transcript continues from this point. The subject resumes, stating that in his assessment, the population has grown too comfortable asking what that comfort costs. He identifies the residents of the city, and further, those who file away, in his words, another successful day without a breach. He observes that meat arrives clean in plastic, that reports receive gold stars, and that no one inquires as to what is scraped from the floor. The interviewer asks whether the subject wishes the public to be informed of the nature of his duties and how such disclosure would benefit him. The subject responds that no one would care, and that the sole reaction would be complaint should the price increase. The interviewer notes that the subject is helping to keep people alive. The subject concurs, but adds that they are not required to see what alive looks like before it stops moving, nor what alive looks like when it is forced to suffer. The interviewer begins to ask about this suffering. The subject interrupts to describe a receptacle situated at the terminus of the slaughter line, containing flayed heads of porcine, bovine, and avian origin. He states that a former colleague had instructed him not to approach it, and had assumed responsibility for its handling. Following that colleague's resignation, the duty transferred to the subject. He notes that the eyes remain unable to be cleaned or packaged, and that each day the accumulated remains observe him as he disposes of them. A period of silence is recorded. The interviewer asks whether the subject wishes to continue. The subject declines. End log. Item designation: SCP-9599. Object class: Thaumiel. Special containment procedures are as follows. SCP-9599 must remain active as a Foundation-run slaughterhouse operating under the front company Green Pastures Incorporated. The facility is to be fully staffed at all times. 300 animals are to be processed on a daily basis, this rate being sufficient to suppress the external anomalous effects associated with the item. Deviation from the daily processing quota is not permitted under standard operating conditions. Instances designated SCP-9599-1 are to be monitored on site. In accordance with Protocol Styx-3, such instances are not to be slaughtered for as long as remains feasible. Their continued presence within the facility is considered integral to containment. All remains generated through the standard operation of SCP-9599 are to be appropriately packaged at the conclusion of processing and shipped for consumption at the end of the workday. Distribution is handled through the front company and follows ordinary commercial channels. Personnel assigned to SCP-9599 are subject to additional administrative measures. Staff may not request reassignment before the completion of a 24-month deployment. Requests submitted prior to the conclusion of this period are to be denied without review. Reassignment following the completion of deployment remains subject to standard Foundation procedure. These procedures, taken together, constitute the operational baseline of the anomaly. The suppression effect is understood to be contingent upon uninterrupted adherence. Any lapse in staffing, processing volume, or the monitoring of SCP-9599-1 instances is to be reported to Site Command without delay. Description: SCP-9599 is the former Waterhouse Processing Plant, a factory farm and industrial slaughterhouse located in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. The facility was dedicated to the processing of poultry, pork, and beef. It was operated by Waterhouse LLC until its closure in January of 1972. Within weeks of the closure of SCP-9599, various anomalous phenomena began to affect the residents of Lancaster. These phenomena were initially recorded as isolated civil incidents before a pattern of geographic correlation was established. The documented effects include the following: inexplicable and often violent deaths of domestic pets, widespread insomnia among the general population, presenting without identifiable medical cause, a marked increase in incidents of grievous self-harm, noted particularly among individuals with no prior history of mental health complaint or psychiatric treatment, a concurrent increase in the local homicide rate, instances of self-inflicted death by starvation, in which affected persons refused all offered sustenance until expiration, and, in a smaller but statistically significant number of cases, cannibalism. These phenomena were observed to intensify in proportion to the duration for which the Waterhouse processing plant remained inactive. The onset of effects did not correspond to any environmental contamination, waterborne agent, or infectious vector identifiable by conventional analysis. Foundation review of the affected population, conducted retroactively, determined that proximity to the shuttered facility was the sole consistent variable. It was on the basis of this determination that the reactivation protocols described in previous sections were formulated, and that the object class of SCP-9599 was ultimately amended to Thaumiel. Containment of the object commenced in June of 1972, following confirmation of the activity described in the preceding sections. Observations across the intervening decades have established a consistent correlation. Prolonged inactivity within SCP-9599 corresponds directly to the manifestation of external anomalous phenomena in the surrounding region. These effects lessen significantly when the plant is operational and cease entirely when SCP-9599 is filled beyond its rated capacity. This correlation underlies the continued classification of the object and informs all present operational directives. Animals housed within SCP-9599 display an increasing probability of developing extreme malformations and paraphysical traits over the course of their lifespans. Upon the emergence of such traits, the affected animal is redesignated as an instance of SCP-9599-1. It is to be emphasized that no animal has been documented as born with these afflictions. Rather, the afflictions develop progressively as a consequence of prolonged residency within the confines of SCP-9599. The mechanism by which this progression occurs remains a matter of internal review and is not addressed within the present section. Per Protocol Stix-3, SCP-9599-1 entities are to be slaughtered as late as possible within their natural lifespan. This directive is understood to serve the broader containment function established in the preceding sections and is not to be deviated from without written authorization. The following addendum, designated 9599.1, catalogs documented SCP-9599-1 instances. The first entry within this addendum concerns subject SCP-9599-1-012, classified as bovine.